Welcome to SmallTalk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of SmallTalk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Weller, who is the author of the newly published book, The Book and the Blade, Illuminating Expositions on the Weekly Parsha, published by Mosaic Press. So thank you, Rabbi, for joining me.
Thank you so much, Nachi, for having me on.
What can you tell the listeners about this new book?
This is a book that really came after years of compilation. The goal of the Sefer, the goal of the book, is to bring out the people in Yonam on the Parsha that make them think, and really to bring Torah to life and really bring out depth in Torah. It has in it different ideas from many, many different sources, but more put together and brought in a way that not only is Torah something, are the ideas something which you can share at your Shabbos table, which I think it can be, but it really touches a chord about a lesson from the Parsha, but something which really brings out a depth to Torah itself and a beauty to Torah.
Right, and let's expound a little more on that. So there are many Sfarim, I mean countless, how many Sfarim come out every year throughout the generations and centuries on Torah, and nowadays, especially on English. So this is in English, this Sefer. I don't know what makes it unique, what makes it stand out, but what makes it unique? I mean, what differs about this book versus the countless others that are published on Chumash?
I think point number one, which is really the key point, is that the ideas in the Sefer are really, I guess as the title really brings out. Everyone looks at it and they're taken away by the title, The Book and the Blade. The Book and the Blade comes from a Chazal, from the words of Chazal, that it says, HaSefer v'Asayef yardu kruchim min hashamayim, which Chazal used in alliteration. I couldn't pass up on the opportunity to also use an alliteration of HaSefer v'Asayef, the Book and the Blade. Chazal were trying to paint a picture for us. And when you can take an idea, but not only say it over, but paint a picture, that it really brings an idea to life. Like I always have this picture in my head, and Mosaic did a great job on the cover of really bringing it out, that you see a Sefer v'Asayef, which means the Book and the Blade are kruchim min hashamayim. It brings a picture out. And I try to convey really the concepts in a form where you don't just hear an idea, but you experience an idea and you see an idea. It really brings out call it a poetry in the idea. It's sort of in a poetic form. I don't mean in rhyme form, but it really brings out the idea in a visual form, which is something Baruch Hashem I've had the opportunity over the years to teach in the classroom, and really learning that people learn by seeing something. And when you can describe an idea not just with saying the concept, but depicting the concept, it's something which really people take home with them.
You mentioned the cover. Mosaic really designed a very nice cover here with they always designed, by the way, just give them a shout out. They always have a beautiful design, but they put the blade, it's got the sword right through the cover, through where it says the book, and then the blade's right at the bottom. It's got the sword going through it, so it's very cool. And I'm sure people say the blade, the book, what's going on with the sword? So that's interesting. So, I want to get to some examples to illustrate and what you mean. But before that, also, you mentioned you're an educator, and that's something we had discussed previously, and you told me that you teach for many years. How does that a factor here and influence these divrei Torah, the fact that you're an educator versus just someone just writing some shtiklach Torah on the parsha?
So I think the genesis of the Sefer was different than most. Most of the things here, most of the divrei Torah, they didn't come just writing divrei Torah that I was sat down to write. They really came from ideas that were presented to many, many different audiences. The Baruch Hashem have discussed the teaching in Mesivta and really spoken and given lectures in Shirim really across the country in different venues. And they were really, really well received. And I think the presentation in which they were given over in the spoken form, in the verbal form, really took a life. Someone inspired me, said, try to write it down. And that way you can share and we can have it, even if you're not here personally, we can still have the ideas. So it started with ideas that were conveyed verbally and given over in a way that really captured people. And I was someone, when I first read it, said, you always start everything with a hook. You grab us all in because you start painting that picture, and then you leave us away with a takeaway. And that's sort of what you do in a classroom. It's true when you try to speak to an audience. And I really tried to take that methodology, take that approach, and just put it down on a piece of paper that everyone can keep with them wherever they are.
So you mentioned that you illustrate, you paint this picture. So let's do that for the listeners here. What do you mean? An example or two? And it could be a parsha that's coming up, already happened, whatever. Just a parsha, just some example from the book of like your style and how you do that in the book.
Okay, definitely a fair question. There are so many. Really always try to do it in the title itself, whether the title begins with an alliteration of sorts or some sort of picture that really captures something. But we'll start with an idea that in the parshas that we're holding in right now, the parshas at the end of Devarim, and really this is a theme that goes throughout the Sefer that I've done time and time again. The end of Parshas Kiseitze we're all familiar with the fact that it ends with the Ma'aseh of Amalek. But a little before then, it talks about the fact we have Even Shleima V'Tzedek Tialach. People have to have very, very exact weights and measures. So we take that picture on our own. We look at a little penny, and really that's how the idea starts. And I'll just really share a little bit. I probably shouldn't read it, but really to bring the idea out. What's a penny? And when we think of a penny as something so small and little, am I really hurting anyone if I adjust the scales? It's such a big deal to shave off a bit of the customer's purchase. And the Torah tells us exactly, yes, Even Shleima V'Tzedek Yilach. And because of that, Rashi says, if a person's not careful, what happens? Amalek comes and attacks us. What's Amalek? So just really to read into quote, but I think it really brings out the point. With palpable faith, the Jewish nation left Egypt. For all eternity, Hashem proclaims, Zacharti l'chesed nu'rayach. We understood the power of omnipotent and followed his lead into a treacherous, forlorn desert. Our faith and trust at that time were tangible. We knew that nothing exists aside from Hashem. It's Hashem Echad. Then it changed. We had this small band of soldiers jumped in, attacked us just to illustrate that we can be attacked. What was Amalek's goal? Amalek's goal was to show Hashem can be attacked. The Bnei Yissaschar is really based on many, many svarim bring out that Amalek is gematria suffix. Amalek is the gematria of El Acher, which means another god. There are two words in the Torah, which is an idea which we focus on in many places, that are almost identical, and they're so close. When you look at them, you almost can mix up one with the other. We say Shema Yisrael every day. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad is Aleph, Ches, and Daled. The Torah writes the Daled large to make sure that we don't err. The pasuk says in Parshas Kisisa, Lo tishtachah ve'el acher, don't bow down to another god. Acher is Aleph, Ches, and Reish. The Daled and the Reish, the difference is only a tiny little bit in the back. What's the difference? Amalek tries to make you think there's El Acher. There's something else. The gematria of Amalek is 240, is El Acher is something else. What's the difference between a Daled and a Reish, between Hashem Echad? Hashem is the only power behind the world. We understand He's behind everything. And El Acher is a tiny little protrusion on the back of the Daled. So that's exactly the point of Chazal. It's exactly the point of Chazal that Chazal are telling us. If you think little things don't matter, you can picture in mind just shaving off a little bit of your scales, you can cheat off a little penny. But look, the difference between a Daled and a Reish are so minuscule, and yet it makes the largest difference in the world. That's the point. The pasuk ends in Parshas Bishalach. It says, "Ki yadal keis kal melchama Hashem b'Amalek midor dor." There's a melchama of Hashem versus Amalek from dor dor. Bnei Yissaschar points out once again, dor dor is Daled and Reish, Daled and Reish. Amalek's goal is to confound Hashem Echad and El Acher, but we have to stand strong and say no, Hashem Echad. So it's a few pennies, and they could have tragic consequences, but those honest pennies are really priceless. The idea that comes up again and again, we find this in Bereshis and Hazinu and Beshalach and Kisisa. But again, it's something which, to me, when you just see the beauty, how two little letters are come up again and again throughout Tanakh, and we find it in the beginning, find it also later in Parshas Hazinu, we say Binu Shnois Dor V'Dor. Same idea. We should understand those who change Daled Reish, and learn from them. Same idea. It says the Dor Tapucha, same the Shlag Kodesh points out, they're Mahapich, Daled, and Reish. There's so much, it's two letters, and they seem to be nothing, but throughout Chazal and the Torah, we find that this comes up again and again. And that's the aside between what Amalek's trying to do. Little things don't matter. There's something else. It's not just the Kadosh Baruch Hu. No, He's behind it all.
Very nice. And some of the sources that you mentioned, Bnei Yissaschar, a few times. So Hasidic sources, what type of sources do you use? Is that generally, or just you use everything? Is not one specific, or there are certain style or certain specific sources that you like more than others throughout the Sefer?
So I'm a big fan of the Gra, and really like to do a lot throughout the Sefer, bring out from the Gra of Talmidov. I mean, it's an unbelievable. The Gra is just on the gun. You can't do anything. Can't go beyond that. I really tried to have a very, very large range of sources. I don't think you're not going to take your common Parsha Sefer and get the sources that we bring over here. things that speak to me a lot, which I think speak to many, many people, is understanding how the words of Lashon Kodesh have so much depth to them, really down to the letter in the word. And again, Rav Hirsch is a classic, but really to bring that all out, the Pappenheim, the Malbim, those are things which people don't normally pull out these types of ideas, but pulling them together. The Gain itself did a lot of that. Then in Rishonim, we have Rishonim that people don't get into Drashas Svarim, that really Baruch Hashem have this list to learn and go through and take out pieces that people probably didn't see often.
Something else that you did, so the Sefer is in English, and then the sources in the bottom are in Hebrew. So on that, I have two questions that are really part of one, so I'll ask you both at the same time, is why did you decide to write this in English? And also, you did that, so why did you put the sources in Hebrew on the bottom?
So, fair question. I think the reason why we wrote it in English, we explained before, is that these were really ideas that originally came from the spoken word. And if it was so received that way, so let's keep it in the way that works. But at the same time, it can be understood simply, but I did want to show everyone that there is a depth here. It wasn't making anything up. It wasn't just ideas, and therefore the source in the bottom are put in Lashon Kodesh, or put in Hebrew, to bring out that everything has something behind it, and someone who wants to go further, they can look that up. That's more, it shouldn't confuse anyone, but it should be at the same time that we're taking ideas and concepts and makiris from places in Chazal and the Rishonim and the Achenim that really have depth and meaning.
Now, what was the process of compiling it into a book? As you said, these were verbal at first, and then you wrote them down, but I'm sure you have much more that you didn't include in here, and you probably edited them, and Mosaic did, and you changed them. So it's always interesting to hear when someone has something that he was giving. You have this even historically, when you have drushes, and we can see this, some Gedolim, where we had their drushes, they said orally, and then they wrote it down, and we're not sure exactly what they were saying, what they write down, and then he edited. So it's a lengthy. What was that process like for you before you compiled it into the Sefer?
Yes. So definitely what we started with was, for almost 7 years, Baruch Hashem, we had a weekly email that was being sent out to a group that kept on growing and growing. And that weekly email was written, it was edited each week, and we went over it. And it was sent out, and Baruch Hashem, it was very well received. The email list kept on growing, and many, many people received it, hundreds of people. And eventually, after you have enough years, we put it together. So we pared down to try to pick some of the best pieces on each parsha. And Mosaic did a great job. Baruch Hashem, it was good stuff coming in. They smoothed it out. They gave me the way they like to present it. And so it really was more paring down from a lot of material to just a few on every week. Because I think I first presented Mosaic, like, no one will take a book that's 700 pages. No one's going to take that. So you got to cut it down to 2 per parsha. I said, okay. I had a friend who also just published something who went through it with me. And we chose the best pieces until we came to what we have in front of us.
Right, and I don't know if we mentioned this, how you have you try to have, like, and just in the beginning of each Torah, if you will, or each piece, you have sort of it has a title. You give it a title, Vaschanon, always beginning. Then you have loved and love, two of Vaschanon, and then Ekev, fast and slow, and then if he's benching and bodies, and usually it's relevant, but you try to make a catchy title, not just like the parsha, Ekev, and just a piece. You actually try to put a little bit more into the title, like, so it should catch the reader, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely know the worst thing of being in a classroom when you're on the other side of the desk is that people don't want to listen. And you have to be catchy. But then you have to follow up with something real. So if we can get that hook to get them started, and I think even the pieces themselves always start with they don't just lay out the pasuk, but really try to bring out the concept in a way that catches them. But like we said before, always walk away with the real takeaway.
Right, is the example you mentioned about priceless pennies, and you just start off with just a few pennies. Who am I really hurting if I adjust the scales, etc. So you don't just start off with the pasuk, as it says. You actually try to, like you said, with the hook, and then you can tell that it was verbal. You have a hook, and then you go into it. It's not just starting off a little dry, whatever it is, irregular, just like start straight off. You have a hook in the beginning. So, who would you say, in conclusion, that this sefer is meant for?
I know it's hard to say. It's probably very cliche, but just from experience of people who have listened. And I don't think the reader is different than the listener. In the terms of people who are listening, Baruch Hashem, the opportunity to speak to many various crowds and really well received. The concepts, like we said, are clear. It begins with a hook. It's something interesting. And it really, with a lot of siyat d'shma, you have the ability to take the ideas that may be complex and may be deep, but bring them down to a level that anyone can take from. So it really is a wide range. Really is a very, very wide range. It's someone who wants something a little more to think about in the parsha, something deeper. And at the same time, it really is people who have less knowledge and less understanding can also gain from it. And But someone who wants not just a simple idea, they will also get.
I also want to mention that, you said that you wrote this in English because these were first oral, and then you decided this is for the reader, for the listener, but you were involved with a Hebrew sefer. You recently published a sefer called Zahava Shulchan on Birchas HaMazon, so I want to mention what that is. So you did write something else in Hebrew, and also you were involved, many listeners are probably familiar with some extent to ArtScroll put out the introduction to the Talmud, and you were involved with, especially as it pertains to Geras or Shiragon. So what were those two things? That's very different from this sefer, from the Book and the Blade, but perhaps you can just mention a little bit of those two projects that you were involved in.
Really, it's Fascinelli and Rizdik to put out a sefer from Lashon Kodesh on benching, on Birchas HaMazon. Always an important topic. It was something that came, another project that came over many, many years. It really has two parts to it. Part number one is a running commentary on the entire Birchas HaMazon. Really, it started with a collection of the Pesachim and the Rishonim, how they explain different words, and went from there to many, many others to explain Kemat every word in benching. And there also, at the end, there are biurim on the sugyas of Birchas HaMazon. Baruch Hashem has been very well received, and really can change someone's benching. And as you mentioned earlier, one of the pieces is bodies and benching. So some of the machshavas that came in the biurim of the book, and some of the machshavas that came in the explanations of benching got translated into English. We did double dipping, but that was the Sefer Zava Shulchan. And years ago, we worked on the Geras of Shiragon. Shiragon, I'm sure, has been discussed on this podcast, but he was almost the end of the Ga'inim, and his description of the Mesiras HaTorah is something which is none other. There's nothing else like it. And I had the supposed to translate it and annotate it. And really, it was, I think Torah is taken through a different lens when you understand where it comes from and how it was put together. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to learn it, and then I got the supposed to translate it and work on it. So it really opened up my understanding of Torah, and I know anyone who's used it has really gained from it amazingly.
I'm just curious here, one final question. How did you get involved in that?
So I had a Rabbi who works for ArtScroll, Rabbi Ramkan Kaufman. He did many, many jobs for ArtScroll. He knew that I was involved in the Geras of Shiragon, so when the project was floated, they needed someone to do it, and he knew that I knew how to write. So he shotgunned me up with ArtScroll and said, go for it. They called me before Shuas, and they said, can you have it done by a couple of weeks later? No, a little more than that. But they rushed it. We ended up done before Sukkot. That thing had to be ready for the Siyam Mashnas. Amazing.
Okay, for those that's the introduction to the Talmud. It's in English, Hebrew now, I believe. So for those interested, can check that out. And your other sefer, Zava Shulchan, I'll put a link in the show notes to that. So those interested can check that out, as well as the Book and the Blade, the topic of this episode. And thank you, Rabbi, for joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi, for having me on the show.